Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Wolters Kluwer Smarter CA webinar series, Input Service Distributor versus Cross-Charge under GST. Our speaker today is CA Ashok Batra. He became a qualified chartered accountant in 1981. Subsequently, he became a law graduate in 2009. Besides, he's also an alumnus from SRCC Delhi. Presently, he's a senior partner in Messrs. E.K. Batra and Associates, a chartered accountancy firm which he established in 1982. He has excellent academic credentials and vast exposure in the field of taxation with specialization in service tax and GST. He possesses rich and varied experience of more than 38 years in business and taxation consultancy. Excuse me. He has written several articles and books for professionals, such as chartered accountants and advocates, and has addressed many seminars and conferences. Leading clients in the private sector from diverse fields are availing professional services of Mr. Batra, and additionally, he's also associated with illustrative list of offices in the public sector. If during this webinar you have any questions which you'd like Mr. Batra to address, you may please post them on the Q&A panel right towards the bottom of the webinar. Towards the end of the webinar, we will take up these questions with Mr. Batra. And it's now over to Mr. Ashok Batra for him to start talking, please.
Good morning to one and all. At the outset, my sincere thanks to Wolters Kluwer for organizing this webinar on a very interesting topic of ISD versus cross charge. I'm sharing my screen with all of you. Is it visible to everyone?
Yes, it is. You might want to go full screen, Mr. Batra.
Yeah, I am doing that. So today's topic is ISD and cross charge. Believe me, this is an area of future litigation. But before I come to that, I'll take one by one. First of all, we will start with the ISD concept. What is ISD? Of course, you must have heard about it. ISD is a term which was being used in service tax also, and it stands for Input Service Distributor. The purpose of having the ISD in service tax was entirely different as compared to the GST, although the name has been taken from the Finance Act 1994. At that point of time, service tax was being levied by the Union of India, and I, being a person who is having multi-locational offices, may have an office in Delhi, and because the management in Delhi, most of the invoices for all the offices are being received in Delhi office. So as a result of which, the whole credit is being accumulated in Delhi office, and Delhi office has a limited output tax liability, as a result of which there was a refund in Delhi office, whereas the other offices, let us say in Calcutta, Bangalore or Chennai, they were having the output tax liability, but because the credit was not there, so there was a demand. In order to ensure that this situation does not arise, the concept of ISD was introduced in service tax, which was on the line of first state dealer in central excise law, wherein the law of Finance Act, that is service tax, permitted a service provider to have another registration as ISD and distribute the credit of services which has been procured or used at various offices, but the invoices are being received at Delhi office due to any reason. So as a result of which this problem was addressed, that there is no demand in other offices where where credit was not there, and even Delhi was able to distribute the credit. So resulting into that you have to claim a refund in somewhere and you have to pay tax somewhere, that problem was resolved. But when it comes to GST, we must understand that section 16(2) says in order to claim the credit, you have to satisfy 4 conditions. You should be having a proper duty paying document, that is invoice, etc. You must have received the goods and services. The payment has been made by the supplier of such goods and services, and I have filed my returns under section 39. So in this GST, if I am receiving certain invoices at my head office in Delhi and the services are being received somewhere in other states, then whether I'll be able to claim the credit, because the two conditions that I should have a proper duty paying document and services must have been received by the same office. Obviously, these two conditions cannot be satisfied in case I'm having the invoices at my head office, let us say in Delhi, and services are being received by my other offices, say Mumbai, Maharashtra, Calcutta, or Chennai. So, friends, in order to overcome this problem, this ISD concept is really useful. Once I am distributing the credit from a Delhi office to my other offices, then they are having a duty paying document in terms of the document which I am issuing in terms of Rule 54, and they are receiving the services. So that problem is being resolved. And this is what I have stated in this slide. So we are moving to the next one. Now, when it comes to claim of credit, I have already explained you this proposition. So I am moving further. Now, coming to the legal meaning, what is ISD? The term ISD has been defined in clause 61 of section 2 of CGST Act, which means it's an exhaustive definition, office of the supplier of goods and services and both. So that means it is an additional registration which is required. It is an office of the supplier of goods and services. This is in addition to what is normally being registered under the normal provision which have been contained in section 22 to 25, which receives the tax invoices issued under section 31 towards the receipt of input services only, not for goods. As the term itself says input service distributor, the definition also says it is applicable only with regard to the input services and not in relation to the goods, and issues a prescribed document for the purpose of distributing the credit. So this meaning makes it absolutely clear it is an additional registration obtained by a provider of service who is getting the invoices for the services which are being received or consumed by other offices, and that can be distributed by the person who has taken an additional registration as ISD. So this is a mechanism wherein I can transfer the credit to my other units which satisfy the conditions of section 16(2), and there is no loss of credit. One thing which is really important to understand is I can distribute the credit only to the offices which are having the same permanent account number. So that means I am a company, I am having multi-locational offices in some states. So I can distribute the credit to my own units which are under the same permanent account number. Now, section 24, read with rule 8, requires a separate registration, as I have already told you also, in addition to what you have been having a normal registration under section 22 of the Act. For the purpose of distribution of credit, rule 54 deals with the subject. Of course, when we'll go to the further slides, and I'll dealing with that rule in detail. And more importantly is section 20 of the CGST Act, which provides the conditions which has to be followed by ISD while distributing the credit, and the procedure for distribution of credit has been laid down in Rule 39. Then in terms of subsection 4 of section 39, read with Rule 65, I have to file my return every calendar month by the 13th of the following month. Now friends, section 20, what are the conditions which has been put up on ISD? The ISD shall distribute the credit of central tax as central tax or integrated tax and integrated tax as integrated tax. Kindly appreciate, I can distribute the credit of central tax as integrated tax and integrated tax as integrated tax. And similarly, the similar provisions are there in the state or UTGST Act also. So this section permit me to transfer the SGCT credit also as IGST credit. It is being done because SGST and CGST are state specific. Once they are state specific, and let us say my unit is in Maharashtra, Mumbai, and if I transfer the credit from Delhi to Mumbai, certainly Mumbai will not be able to get the credit of SGST and CGST which has been charged with Delhi. So I can distribute that credit as IGST so that my Bombay office can claim this credit and there is no loss of credit. Now, after providing this facility, and these words which I have marked with the red are important to note, because when we go to the rules, there is some mismatch into that. Then comes, what are the conditions? The conditions are similar to the same which were there in the Finance Act 1994. The credit can be distributed to the recipient of credit against a document containing such details as may be prescribed, and that is what we have discussed. Rule 54 will be dealing with that. The amount of credit distributed shall not exceed the amount of credit available for distribution. Undoubtedly, a reasonable one. Whatever amount I have paid as credit, I cannot distribute more than that. Then credit of tax paid on input service attributable to a recipient of credit shall be distributed only to that recipient. For example, I have received an invoice for a service which has been received by my Mumbai office only. So the credit of that service has to be distributed only to Mumbai and not to any other office. Then it says if the credit belongs to more than one recipient, then that credit has to be distributed pro rata on the basis of turnover in a state, and this is the term which has been defined in the law. And in simple language, I will say proportionately. Suppose that credit belongs to 3 units having a turnover of 100 each. So one third will be the credit which will be distributed to all the 3 units. And in case I am having 5 units and the credit belongs to all the 5 units, for example, there may be a centralized advertising campaign, the benefit of which has been received by all my units, then the principle is the same as compared to the earlier one where it is more than one office. So the turnover basis distribution was required, and when it is to the all recipient, again it is the same formula. I have to take the turnover of all the units now. Let us say there are 5 units and all the turnover of the 5 units is 100 each for the sake of simplicity. Then 20% credit will be distributed to all the units. So that is why I have not bolded certain portion in clause E, because it is replica of clause D. And in fact, clause D apply when the credit belongs to more than one recipient, and clause E applies when all the recipients are receiving such services. Now, the manner in which the credit is to be distributed is slightly cumbersome and has been governed by Rule 39. Now, I will be hurriedly going through these slides and not dealing with these slides in depth because it is a procedure only. It clearly says that the input tax credit available for distribution in a month shall be distributed in the same month, and the detail thereof shall be furnished in Form GSTR 6, which is the form prescribed as return for ISD dealers. So ISD shall distribute all the credit in accordance with the provision of clause D. That means even the ineligible credit has to be distributed, and all the principle which we have discussed and which has been enshrined in section 20 has to be made applicable for this also. Then central tax, state tax, union territory tax and integrated tax shall be distributed separately. This is the clause which goes against the mandate of section 20, because section 20 says you can distribute the credit of central tax as IGST, and state tax also says SGST as IGST. But this clause says central tax, state tax, union territory tax, and integrated tax shall be distributed separately in accordance with the provisions of clause B. Now there is a formula, so I am not going into that. This formula in pith and substance is the same. If the credit belongs to 3 units, I have to take turnover of those 3 units, and in proportion to each unit having the ratio vis-a-vis the total turnover, that credit will be distributed in that simple arithmetical formula, and it has been provided there. Then comes clause E, which says input tax credit on account of integrated tax shall be distributed as input tax credit of integrated tax to every recipient. Central tax, state tax, or unitary tax shall, this is important. They say if it is a credit of central tax and state tax and the recipient is located in the same state. Now we all are aware that in case I am having more than one offices in a state, I can seek more than one registration in the same state. So maybe I am having 2 offices in UP, let us say in Lucknow and Kanpur. Lucknow is my head office, and I am receiving certain services which has been received by Kanpur office also. So I can distribute the credit from Lucknow to Kanpur also. And in case he's he is located in the same state, I can distribute the credit of CGST and SGST as CGST and SGST only. But if I distribute that credit to a person who is located in another state, then I can distribute it as a integrated tax. Then clause 1G says that you have to issue the invoice, which is in terms of Rule 54. As I told you, it must contain all the particulars which have been specified therein: your name, name of the recipient, PAN number, GST number, etc. Then 1H talk about the deduction in the credit note. For example, I have received certain services from a supplier who has issued me a credit note subsequently. So that credit note has also to be distributed to my other units in the same manner in which the original credit was distributed to all of them. Similar provisions are there in relation to the debit note also. Then in case there is a negative balance in that month in which I am reducing the credit, then that amount shall be added to the output tax liability of the recipient. So this is what it is. Otherwise, it is all pure procedure. Then it says the amount of input tax credit distributed by an ISD is reduced later on for any other reason, because of deficiency of service or something like that. Then I have to follow the same procedure which is there in the case of credit note, and all the provisions shall apply. That is 10 days for the reduction of credit also. Then friends, what is really important is that I have to distribute the credit for a month in the same month, and even credit note also I have to distribute in the same month. This is the slide which gives you a fair idea that while distributing the credit, the government has ensured that there is no loss of credit which can happen. For example, central tax can be distributed as CGST and IGST, similarly state and union territory. So it is being done to ensure that there is no loss of credit while distributing the credit, even if I am receiving the invoice wherein SGST and CGST is charged, and my units are located in other states. So I'll distribute the credit as IGST and there will be no loss of credit. So now, what is the informative in section 20 versus 39? It is important to note that section 20 permit distributor of integrated tax either as IGST or CGST. However, when we are reading the rule, it says distribution of ITC of integrated tax can be done only as IGST. So I think if there is a clash between statutory provision and the rule, the law is very clear. Statutory provision shall prevail over the rule, and according to my humble understanding, the rule shall prevail. Then Rule 39 also mandate distribution of credit to all the recipients to whom the credit is attributable, although such units are not registered. So there may be a situation where I am not having a fixed establishment, but there is some unit and I am distributing the credit because that credit belongs to that particular unit. Then there can be a loss of credit because section 16 very clearly says every registered person shall be eligible for the credit. So this is another area which we need to focus in. So wherever I am distributing the credit, in order to ensure that there is no loss of credit, I must ensure that all my units in other states are also registered. Then what is the normal practice I have seen, and the common mistake which is being done by the firm? From my experience, I am telling you, they think 17.5 is a block credit. There is no need for the distribution of the same. But in fact, it is not so. The rule very clearly says you have to distribute the credit, which is ineligible also in terms of it may be for other than businesses, it may be for personal purposes, it may be block credit under section 17.5. So all the credit has to be distributed. Then, as I told you, if a credit note has been received by me, that is, me means ISD distributor, then I have to distribute that credit to the recipient of those units, and that credit has to be distributed in the same proportion in which the original credit was distributed, and same is the principle with regard to the debit note also. So this makes it very cumbersome because it has to be done in the same month. But yes, besides these limitations, it ensures that there is no loss of credit, and in order to claim the credit and to satisfy the condition under section 16(2), this mechanism provides this procedure. We must have noticed that it is only in the case of input services, not applicable to the goods. And the government is becoming wiser day by day, and from looking from the legal disputes which were there in the earlier law, they have enacted section 21, and they have taken lesson from the earlier disputes so that those kind of disputes should not arise in future. What is this section 21? They say if there is a wrong distribution of credit by the ISD to any of its unit, then who is liable to pay the tax? In the earlier regime, whenever a notice was being issued to the ISD, then the defense was being taken before the government that ISD has not availed any credit. It is only following a procedure wherein he is distributing the credit received by various units through this mechanism. And when the notice was being served to the unit who have wrongly claimed the credit, then the defense normally taken by the professionals used to, sir, you cannot serve me the notice because classification cannot be challenged in the hands of the recipient. I have not committed any mistake. Whatever credit has been distributed by me to me by the ISD, I have claimed that credit. So if any lapses are there, those lapses are on the part of the ISD, and the demand should be created in the hands of the ISD. Looking to this litigation, the government enacted this section, and they have very clearly stated that in case I am distributing the credit which is resulting in excess distribution to one of the unit, then the excess credit so distributed shall be recovered from such recipient along with interest. So meaning thereby, if there is a wrong distribution by the ISD, because ISD is not claiming the credit has been claimed by the recipient. So the show cause notice or the action under section 73 or 74 will be taken not against the ISD, but it is to be taken in the hands of the recipient to whom that excess credit has been taken. Because we have contesting couple of cases on behalf of PNB, so I have just mentioned this. In those PNB cases where we have been taken back defense that the show cause notice has been issued without jurisdiction, the government has become very wise and make it very clear. In the statutory provision itself, it has been provided that it is the recipient who shall be subject to penal action under the law. He will be the one who will be served with the show cause notice, and if ultimately held to be that the credit has been excess distributed, the recovery shall be made only from the recipient. And this concept is there in service tax also. As I told you, the concept was there, but was it for a different purpose. Here we must remember that in terms of section 25(4), if I am having a different establishment of the same PAN, they are being considered as a distinct person. Similarly, if I am carrying on my business in other states through other establishment also, they are also being treated as distinct persons. Those provisions will come in the subsequent slide. So ISD, I'm just concluding here, is a mechanism wherein I can distribute the credit of GST paid on the input services, the benefit of which has been availed either one unit, two unit, or all the units, and that credit has to be distributed following the restrictions and limitations prescribed in section 20, which are very reasonable one. I cannot distribute the credit more than what I have received. Any credit attributable to one unit will go to that unit. If it belongs to more than one unit, in proportion to their turnover, and in case it belongs to all the unit, then in proportion to what they bear in the total turnover. And this, as per rule 65, you have to file form 6 GSTR and the credit will come in GSTR 6A on the line of 2A, where we are getting the credit when my supplier is filing his GSTR 1. Now there are certain issues which becomes important when we understand the concept of ISD. There may be a situation where I am receiving a legal services provided by a firm of advocates and I am liable to pay reverse charge. Whether the credit of reverse charge can also be distributed through this mechanism, because in that case I have to make the payment under reverse charge, and once I am liable to make payment under reverse charge, of course in the case of legal services there is an exemption if my turnover is less than exemption limit, but in most of the cases wherever ISD requirement is there, they are all big units. So obviously once I am paying the tax under reverse charge, then in terms of section 24, I am mandatorily required to be registered as a regular dealer. So meaning thereby, in case I have to distribute the credit of RCM, it may be legal service, it may be transportation services, it may be any other service, sponsorship or whatever, or services received from non-taxable person, then I need to get myself registered as a regular dealer also. So the best solution to this problem will be, in the case of RCM services, we can ask the supplier to raise different invoices in the name of the unit who are receiving such services, failing which this ISD mechanism cannot be made applicable so far as RCM services are concerned, as mandated by section 9394 of the CGST Act and 5354 of IGST. Another question may come, I am a big organization like PNB where I am having one head office and more than 6,000 units, and there are 80 circle office, and every circle office having 70-80 branches under its administrative control. So is it required that I should take more than one registration? If each unit is being treated as a distinct person, then it is an office of the supplier of goods and services or both. Then is it possible that I can take more than one registration? According to my humble understanding, there is no bar. You can take more than one registration also. But in case you are receiving the invoices only at head office, then it is better to take only one registration and distribute the credit from that office. So this is the slide which will conclude the discussion with regard to ISD. It clearly says that distribution of IATC through ISD is very much rigid, especially when we have to follow the mechanism as prescribed in Rule 39, and the credit has to be distributed in the same month. And I have to file my return by 30th of the month. And unless otherwise I don't file my returns, my units will not get the credit. And it is applicable only in respect of input services, not for the distribution of goods. With this, I'm concluding my deliberation on ISD, and I'm sure because this concept was already there in service tax, most of you may be aware of most of the things. But in any case, in GST, as I told you, the purpose is different. The purpose is not to break the chain of ITC. So with this, now we can come to the most important and litigated topic, that is cross charge. As we have seen, ISD is a concept wherein I distribute the credit, the invoices of which has been received in one office because of any reason, maybe centralized accounting, maybe management is sitting there, maybe I am having a centralized chasing system, etc. Whereas cross charge is reverse of ISD. In fact, it is a mechanism wherein the accumulation of the credit at different location comes to the central office. I have taken one example, ABC India as a plant at Maharashtra, but representative offices at Delhi, Chennai, Kolkata and Tamil Nadu, which is only engaged in marketing activities. all supplies are happening directly from plant at Maharashtra to customer across India. In this case, ITC of local taxes in respect of services obtained at local offices at Delhi, Chennai and Kolkata shall be accumulated at those respective offices unless the cross charging is not adopted. If cross charging is adopted, then such offices will do cross charge on their plant, that is at Maharashtra, for business support services, and subsequently accumulated ITC at those offices shall be used or transferred to the Maharashtra unit. I'll just explain it once again for the sake of simplicity. Let us say I am having a manufacturing unit in Maharashtra, all my sale is being done there, but I have got certain offices because my customers are pan India in 4 metros, and there they are providing post sale marketing services. None of the revenue is being earned by those offices, but I am incurring lot of expenditure in those offices because they are providing me all pre-sale and post-sale marketing services. They are collecting my payments. They are resolving their issues if there is any defect in the product. They are providing post-sale warranty services also. But revenue is booked only in Maharashtra because all the sale has been done from Maharashtra. So now, whatever expenditure I am incurred in these 4 metros, that is Delhi, Chennai, Calcutta, then that credit will go waste. That is one part of it. Second part is Section 22 says if you are providing certain services, then you are liable to seek registration in every state from where you are providing a services. Now, undoubtedly, these offices which are located in these metro cities are certainly providing services, and they are fixed establishment because I had a manpower there, I had a full infrastructure there in terms of resources, in terms of manpower, in terms of technical facilities. These are full-fledged offices. So, of course, for whom they are working? They are working for Maharashtra office only. In case these offices would not have been there, Maharashtra office will be providing all these services or facilities to its customer. If that being so, and in terms of Section 25(4), if they are being considered as distinct person, then we can easily say that Calcutta office, Chennai office, or Delhi office is providing services to Maharashtra office, and if that being so, then they must cross charge. And by doing so, it is not only that my credit loss is being avoided. I'm able to absorb all the credit which I have availed in these offices by cross charging to the Mumbai office. I am also making it sure that I am complying with the requirement of registration also. Though it is being called one nation, one tax, but in fact, if you look at Section 22, it clearly says it's a destination based tax and the revenue goes to the state where these supplies are being consumed ultimately. So all those offices will certainly say Maharashtra, Delhi, or Tamil Nadu. They can say you are having your offices here using all the infrastructure, providing service to Bombay office. Where is the revenue coming to? Our state. So obviously from that point of view also, Section 22, 23, 24, 25, which contains the registration procedures. 22 talk about registration requirement, 23 is not liable to be registered, 24 talk about compulsory registration, and 25 about the procedure. So in order to fulfill the requirement of Section 22 also, I have to raise invoice to my Bombay office. There may be a different view, and those views and perspectives we'll be discussing in the slides, which are going to be there. Then comes legal perspective. Different unit of the same entity functioning in different states are treated as distinct persons of the GST law. We all understand that. And supply of goods and services are both between such distinct persons, even if made without consideration or treated as supplies in terms of CGST Act. This deeming fiction was created so that input tax credit chain is maintained. Now I'll give you another example. Why they have introduced that the transaction between distinct person even without consideration shall be subject to tax. I'll give you a different example from different state to make the things more clear to all of you. Let us say there is a manufacturer of ready-made garment in Ludhiana. He is manufacturing and his turnover is 20 crores, whereas he is having his showroom in Delhi, Mumbai, Calcutta, Bangalore, and 5 crore rupees material is being transferred to all the 4 showrooms. Or I may have one warehouse in Maharashtra from where the goods are moving to my Pune showroom or my Mumbai showroom. Now, once I am doing all the manufacturing in Ludhiana, my whole credit is there in Ludhiana in relation to the manufacturing of such products. And if such products are being sold in other states, then there is the output tax liability which will arise in other states. And in case I don't have this mechanism of cross charging to my other unit, there will be a surplus credit in Ludhiana, whereas there will be a demand or output tax liability in my other showrooms. So in order to overcome this provision was being enacted. Earlier on, we all know in the restful regime, when I was moving the goods otherwise than by way of a sale, I was issuing the F form. Now, because all standstill statutory forms are gone, so I have developed this mechanism that in case I am transferring my goods to my own distinct person, it may be a warehouse, it may be a showroom, I will charge tax from them. By doing so, I am availing the input tax credit of Ludhiana and then distributing that credit. So that credit, once coming to the state from where I am making a supplies, can be adjusted against my output tax liability of that state. So this is how this mechanism was there. So cross charge was a must. Without this, credit mechanism cannot function. So this mechanism was a necessity so far as the goods are concerned. Now the only question is, by writing in the schedule 1 that the supplies made to distinct persons include supplies of goods, services, or both, can there be a simple solution that this cross charge is only in relation to the goods so that there is no break of the credit? And then the whole complication which arise because of cross charge of services can be avoided. Is it so simple? We will all discuss in the coming slides. This purpose would have been well achieved if only supply of goods without consideration alone are thus deemed to be supply. As I told you, why it is being extended to services, that is the question which you need to understand. Now we'll go to the legal provisions. We have already discussed it, but what is the real language? Let's go through that. A person who has obtained or is required to obtain more than one registration, whether in one state or union territory or more than one state or union territory, shall in respect of each such registration shall be treated as distinct person. As I told you, that Ludhiana factory having showroom in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, Pune, though belongs to the same PAN unit, but for the purpose of GST, they are being considered as a distinct person. And once Ludhiana is transferring material to these showrooms, these are being treated as a supply and IGST is applicable. Similarly, 25(5) says, where a person who has obtained or is required to obtain registration in a state or union territory in respect of an establishment has an establishment in another state or union territory, then such establishment shall be treated as establishment of distinct person. This was the example which I gave you in the case of Maharashtra, where the whole manufacturing was being done in Maharashtra and there were marketing offices in other states, as I told you, in other metros. So there also the same thing, because the goods are not being transferred, but those offices are working and those offices are working for head office. So they say even those establishment will be treated as distinct person, and any transaction between these two distinct persons in layman language will be considered as if it is taking place between two different persons. Now, another legal provision which we need to remember is Schedule 3, Para 1. What does it say? It says services by an employee to the employer in the course of or in relation to his employment is neither being treated as a supply of goods nor supply of service. There are only three schedules in CGST Act. Schedule 1 we have discussed, there are certain supplies which are being treated as supply even if there is no consideration. But when you go to the definition of supply in section 7, it says supply is the inclusive definition. Supply includes sale, transfer, barter, exchange, license, rental, lease, disposal. But then it has to be for a consideration in the course of other services. But schedule 1 makes a demarc procedure from that. It says even if when the transaction is between two distinct persons, then even if it is without consideration, you are subject to tax. It is being treated deemed supply. Schedule 2 is not relevant for our discussion today, but it simply specifies whether a particular supply will be treated as supply of goods or service, like works contract. There is no doubt in a civil works contract, material and services both are involved. But in case you look at the CGST law, you will appreciate that there are time of supply, place of supply only in relation to goods and services, not for both. Similarly, rate of tax for goods and services. So that means every transaction, whether it involves supply of goods and services, doesn't matter. It has to be classified either as a supply of goods or a service, and then accordingly rest of the provision shall apply. Either the time of supply, or the place of supply, whether it's the interstate transaction. So all those things, even rate of tax for that matter, because rate of tax is only for goods and services, not for both. So that transaction. So that schedule 2 is not subject matter of discussion. Schedule 3 is the subject matter of discussion. I already read one. Schedule 3 contains the entries which are neither being treated as supply of goods nor of service. So obviously, they are not subject matter of GST because they are neither being treated as supply of goods and services. And then para 1, as I told you, is very, very important, which says services by an employee to the employer in the course of or in relation to employment is not subject to GST. And we all know we had number of employees ourselves, we are employers, somewhere we are employee also, then employer to employee, nobody charging GST. It is because of this entry. Schedule 1, as I told you, is important. It says supply of goods and services are both. Now, this is important to see. It says supply of goods and services are both between related persons or between distinct persons. Related persons has also been defined, and related persons includes employer, employee, where I am able to control the affair of another unit. So all those things are there. So most of the time, when I am under the same PAN, they are all related persons and distinct persons as well. They are distinct persons, and when I am having a dealing with the related person, even that without consideration is being treated as a supply. So for our limited purpose, we are talking about cross charge, which is applicable to different distinct persons of the same PAN. So we can restrict ourselves to the one proposition: supply of goods and services are both between distinct persons as specified in section 25 when made in the course of. Now we'll understand certain concept after going through the entries. Employer can be any legal entity, but employee has to be an individual. I think there cannot be any two doubts about that. Employer can be a proprietorship firm, employer can be a partnership firm, LLP, society, EOP, BOI, whatever. But employee has to be an individual. Employer and employee, which are referred to entry number 1 of schedule 3, would constitute a legal person. Then they have used the word employer and employee and not the word person. It does say that services provided by an employee to the employer. It is not using the terminology services provided by an employee to the person. Why I am saying so? Because this discussion will become very important and relevant when we will talk about cross charge and its valuation. Then another thing which is really important to note is that this entry in Schedule 3 says services provided by the employee to the employer in the course of or in relation to his employment, and it is not restricted or limited to the place of work. I am an employee. That corporate may have four units in Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Madras. Then it says services provided by the employee to the employer in the course or in relation to his employment, and it is not using the term services provided by the employee to any person in Delhi office, in Mumbai office, in Calcutta office. This is what I want to point it out. Of course, it's a controversial subject. There may be two different opinions, and we must respect other perspective also wherever it comes. But I am giving you what I could understand from all the language. Now there can be three kind of situation when it comes to distribution of service. With regard to distribution of goods, I don't think there is any problem. Neither there is a dispute nor there is any problem. Industry has also accepted it, government has also accepted it, and it is serving a purpose that there is no loss of credit, tax is going to the state when the goods are being consumed. Absolutely no problem. Now the problem is with regard to the services only. And ISD is also with regard to the services. That is why I have chosen this subject collectively. What is the distinction between the two? Now, as the discussion will progress, you will appreciate that both are mandatory in nature and both are having their own independent area of functioning. Now, I can procure goods at head office centrally located and then distribute that to my other offices. Maybe I am having a centralized office, I am in a better position to negotiate, I want to buy 500 laptops, and those laptops are to be used by my other units. So there can be one situation that I can ask the other unit to purchase it from the supplier, and supplier can bill it and supply it to them. Certainly in that case, there will be no role of any no role of the head office, and head office is not transferring material to them. But yes, once the head office feels I had a better marketing team in Delhi office who can negotiate with the corporate and get a better price in case I buy such laptop in bulk, then according to me there is no problem. The person can bill it to me. I can give an instruction, bill it to me, and ship it to the other units wherever they're likely to be used. There's no additional transportation cost also. The goods are being delivered there, and then I can raise my invoice with other unit with regard to such laptops. And conditions of 16, section 16 are also met because the unit who is receiving those laptops is having a duty paying document which is being included, Rule 36. Even my invoice, that is the invoice issued by the head office, is also a duty paying document. So certainly there is no problem. Then comes procuring services at head office centrally for utilization of the unit across the country. This is very important. Kindly appreciate. In this scenario, head office may enter into a contract with the supplier of service. For example, it may be a security agency services, wherein I can say security agencies, I need 100 guards in my various offices. You can provide those guards in those offices. Let us assume for the sake of simplicity, 4 units, Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, Madras, all 25 guards are to be distributed for the unit. And if provided that and bill it to my head office, can I cross charge it to my other offices? Or I can distribute that credit through ISD mechanism? In my humble opinion, I can distribute that credit through ISD mechanism because I have not done any value addition to that. What I have did, the invoice has come to me, service has been provided by the other supplier to my other offices, and because 75% credit belongs to other 3 offices, I can distribute the credit. But what will happen when it is a statutory audit services? Can I provide such services? Can I become supplier? When it comes to IPR services, when it comes to other services. So in my humble opinion, wherever I am receiving supplies from the third party, wherein I don't use such services in my office, I don't consume such services in my office, and those services are being availed by other offices, the procedure of ISD is a must and it has to be followed. Then comes some other mechanism. The third situation, of course, I can distribute ISD. There's no problem with regard to that mechanism also. There's no loss of credit. Then comes the third scenario, which is the subject matter of litigation. I procure certain services like banking, renting, staff, furniture, consumables, and avail such services. And then I provide certain marketing services to my office, other offices, certain consultancy services to other offices, certain administrative functions like accounting, etc., to other offices. Now, those services have been consumed in my office. I am not transferring the credit of those services, or those services are not being used by my other offices like security, like statutory audit. These are the services which has been consumed by the head office. And once the head office has consumed such services, he is providing accounting, marketing, management, or other administrative support services. Does it require a cross charge, or ISD can be made applicable here also? In my humble opinion, ISD has no role to be played here because these services have been consumed in the head office. Let us say the rent of the premises of head office has been consumed here itself. The security guard who is standing in head office is there. Employer and employee, those employees are working there. Furniture depreciation, electricity bill, everything has been consumed. And then I am providing accounting, marketing, and management or other services. So in my opinion, it is a question of cross charge. Now, before I proceed further, I would like to deal with a very important Karnataka Appellate Authority of Advance ruling, which is very popular in Columbia Asia Hospitality. This is really important to understand because they were having 11 hospitals, having one central office IMO in Bangalore, and Bangalore offices were providing services to the other 11 hospitals in 4 states of southern India. This Columbia Asia Hospital filed an application before the Authority of Advance ruling and then ultimately confirmed by the Appellate Authority of Advance ruling, asking a couple of questions. We all understand once the services have been provided to the hospitals who are providing medical services to public at large, those services are exempted and not subject to tax. If those services are not subject to tax, then obviously if Bangalore office, which I am calling a IMO, India Management Office, if he is providing certain services and he has to discharge the liability and cross charge, this is an additional cost to that office, because whatever amount I will charge, that credit is not available to those hospitals. And looking to that scenario, this application was being filed to whether these supplies are liable to be taxed at all. And if they are liable to be taxed, let us say in that Bangalore office, I am incurring 10 crore rupees as my total expenditure. 6 crore is my establishment cost. Is it 4 crore rupees supplies with reasonable margin, which is subject to GST, or I have to include the cost of employee also, and then I have to bill my other offices for 10 crore. In that case, my liability will go 2.5 times more, because 6 crore is not subject to GST. If it forms part of the value of taxable supply, then I have to charge, assuming 20% is the rate of tax, I have to charge 2 crore rupees. And in case employer-employee relationship, that schedule 3 entries there, and these are the employee to the corporate, not to this Bangalore office, then certainly I have to pay tax only on rest of the amount, that is 4 crore, which comes out to be 80 lakh rupees. So this was the question which was being asked. Firstly, Authority of Advance ruling said you are liable to pay tax on whole 10 crore rupees. These employees have provided service to Karnataka office only. And looking to that fact, this 10 crore is subject to tax. Whether you are eligible for the credit or not, that's a different issue. Because even otherwise, in various hospitals, you are receiving number of services which are subject to GST and which form part of your cost. For example, in a hospital, if there is a security agency, if there is a housekeeping service, if there are telephone being installed in the hospital, and there are n number of services that are received by the hospital, which are subject to GST. So all these services form part of your cost. Similarly, when you are providing or making payment to your Karnataka office, who is providing you management, accounting, and other services, then why you should not pay tax on that? Assuming this Karnataka office is not there, then you should have engaged the third parties who might have charged GST. Not might have, they must have charged GST on that. So that would have been your cost. So they answered against Columbia Shaw Hospital by saying that these are the services which are need to be cross charged, and not only that, even the cost of the employee is to be included. So this is how they gave a ruling, and then the matter is pending before the Karnataka High Court. Now that decision will become very, very important. There, I have tried to distinguish between IST and cross charge. Only ITC on input services which are being attributable to other entities, and I am not consuming that. I am only receiving the invoice I can distribute. But once such services have been consumed by head office and a different form of administrative support is being given to the other unit, that is what cross charge is. Now, the department issued a draft circular. This is really important. Unless otherwise we don't understand that, we won't be able to appreciate. And believe me, it is an area of litigation where a lot of litigation will come in the times to come. They have given an example. I would like to read this circular slightly in detail because that shows the mind of the department. And once the department has taken a view, we all understand the circulars are not binding on us. And more importantly, it is a draft circular only, which was released on 5th of October. Doesn't matter. But it tells us what is the thinking of the department. And if the department bent upon that, then the department can amend the law also if there are certain infirmities in the drafting of the law. Renting of immobile property is one service which came on 1st June 2007. Challenged Delhi High Court in the case of home solution held to be ultra virus in renting per se is not taxable, but the department was willing to collect the tax, amended that statutory provision retrospectively from 1st June 2007 in Finance Act 2010. Similarly, in the case of commercial training and coaching, if the department intends to collect the tax, and that is the understanding, and if there is some infirmity in drafting the law, even that can be cured, and the government is competent to amend the law retrospectively to counter any judgment also. Now, in this case, the department has taken an example that there is a head office in Mumbai, and there are two branches, Calcutta and Chennai. And this head office and these branches are engaged in the software business, and head office procures security service for the entire organization from a security agency, which deploy 10 security guard at head office, 5 at branch office 1 and 5 at branch office 2. The head office has a personnel department where a number of employees are there who maintain leave record, performance evaluation, promotion of all employees, posting at all the 3 levels. The activity performed by the personnel department at office marked as C1 in this circular. And then there's a technical maintenance department of the head office, wherein they maintain all the machines located at all the 3 offices, head office, branch office 1 and 2. And then activity performed by the technical maintenance department is being treated as technical maintenance services marked as C2 in this circular. Then they say because you are into the development of the software in a software development project undertaken by branch office 2, 2 engineers posted at branch office 1 assisted branch office 2. Now, the activity performed by the 2 engineers of branch office 1 for the software development undertaken by branch office 2, where the revenue is booked by branch office 2 only, will it be subject to cross charge? Now, very interesting question, it's a very interesting answer. Is it mandatory to distribute ITC in respect of input services, that is IS1, procured by head office but attributable to both head office? This IS1 is nothing but security service. As I told you, there is a security service, this one, which is being used and it is not being consumed in head office wholly. 10 guards at head office, 5 at branch. So with regard to this, they say, is it? Yes, it is mandatory to follow ISD procedure. Language, it is mandatory to follow ISD procedure laid down in section 20, read with rule 39, which we have already gone through, for distribution of ITC in respect of input services procured by head office from a third party, but attributable to both head office and branch office. So they say 5 guard at branch office 1, 5 guard at branch office 2, you have to distribute and you have to seek registration as ISD and distribute that credit to these branches. Then the second question comes, will the input service procured by head office from a third party, as I told you, security services, to be used by the branch office, the ITC of which is distributed in accordance with the ISD procedure, as you have said, it has to be distributed, let it be distributed, shall be treated as supply by head office to the branch office and will be taxable in the hands of HO. Tomorrow, department can also say, if these services have been provided by you, you have availed the service on security guard services from security agency, and you have provided this to your branch office. This is no. Once you're distributing the credit as IST, then these are not the services which have been provided by the head office. And we all know the guard has been provided by the security agency only, and head office has no role to play except for receipt of invoice. And in order to satisfy the condition of 16.2, because I have a duty paying document, I must receive the services. Services are received at branch office. Now the invoice is being issued by the ISD. So both the conditions being satisfied there, so they can also avail the credit thereof. So they say no, the services procured by third party, which is not being consumed by head office, but exclusively for the use of branch office, would not be separately treated as supply of service made by the head office to the branch office. Then comes the next question. If head office consider that procurement, distribution and management of common input services for use by head office and branch office as per ISD provision lead to an expense, how can it apportion these expenses to the branch office? This is very important. If you want, I can read it once again. This is if head office consider that procurement, distribution and management of common input services. We were having two departments, personnel department and technical department, who was maintaining the machinery and who was doing the services of human resources. Now, head office may incur certain expenses on procurement, distribution. Answer is very important. Procurement, distribution and management of common input services. The head office may or may not apportion and recover such expenses from branch office. Nevertheless, such procurement, distribution and management of services by the head office from the branch office is a separate service provided by head office to the branch office. They said those employees, those security guards, those other expenses which you have incurred is being consumed at head office level, and these are the independent services that is provided to branch office. And what are those services? Those are in relation to the maintaining of records of the employees and technical support service. So it should be invoiced by the head office to the branch office to the extent of expense incurred by head office. It is a service distinct from those services the ITC in respect has been distributed through IST procedure. In the case of security guard, I consumed only 10 security guard services that will form part of my expense. Rest is all ISD, so it is for the head office to value the service. Now, how you will evaluate that? Let us say head office has incurred an expenditure including 10 security guard. For 10, it has already distributed the credit, is let us say 1 crore. Then how it is to be valued? Whether I have to value it at 1 crore and pay the GST, or it has to be valued less the minus of employees cost, or some margin is also to be added. So they say all these things you have to go to para 3.6 where the answer has been provided. Then comes the next question. If head office generates some services internally, such as common administration by maintaining common administrative team, or common IT maintenance through maintenance team, where the team members are the employee of the head office, or these employees providing any service to the branch office. So the question comes, once is an employees of the corporate. So whether the employee who is engaged in the head office is providing service to the corporate or providing service to the head office only. So these are the controversies. We'll deliberate on all those controversies in detail. But what is the answer of the department? That we need to really understand. The offices are establishment of an organization, different states are establishment of the distinct person in terms of section 25(4), which you have gone through. Explanation 1 to section 8 says same GST law envisages this distinct registered person to be independent entities, though part of one legal entity, and they are providing service to each other. Employees posted at head office who look after the administrative work of head office and branch office, or maintenance of machine installed at head office and branch office, or perform similar other functions for the organization as a whole, or for the particular branch office, a distinct person of providing service to branch office is not the correct prospective to be determined here. The correct prospective for examining the issue in hand would be to determine whether the head office and branch office are providing service to each other, and not whether the employees of head office are providing service to the branch office. They say it is not important to whom the head office is providing a service. That employee is providing service to the head office, and then head office is using that services, providing a different service of administrative support or technical support. So these are the services provided by the head office to the branch office. This is the view of the department in the draft circular issued in the month of October 2019. What is the legal basis for concluding that head office is providing service? Okay, why it is being so? Why you are saying so? He says head office and branch office are distinct person in terms of subsection 4 of section 25. They are also related person in explanation 8 to section 15 of CGST Act. It may be noted that supply of goods and services are both between related person or distinct person when made in the course of further subject to supply, even if it is made without consideration, which we have seen para 1 of schedule 1. Thus, services produced or generated in head office by its employee and used by or supplied to branch offices with or without consideration or supply is liable to GST. So the department view is very clear that they are subject to cross charge. And with regard to valuation, they have given this formula in question how it's to be valued. They say because you're distinct person, then section 15 subsection 1 is not applicable. Because section 15 subsection 1 will apply that the transactional value shall be the value of taxable service if both the parties are not related and money is the only consideration. In this case, neither the money is the consideration. I am not supposed to receive anything from my own office. I cannot make payment to myself. Rather, this is one of the questions when we were about to start the deliberation. So this came in question answer session. I'm answering it here itself. So there is no need, and this 180 days payment has been exempted when the transaction is between two distinct persons of a different person. So they say it is not applicable. So then you have to go to the rule. For the purpose of rule, either it is open market value or similar kind of goods, or you can go to rule 30 and 31. If both are not available, then they say you have to find out a reasonable method which follow the GST procedure and as well as the valuation principles or accounting standard accounting principle. So they have given this formula. Illustration they have given, head office has sent an annual expenditure budget of 10 lakh for the administrative division, looking after the personnel administration of the employee in head office as well as branch office. The value of services supplied by head office and branch office may be determined under Rule 31 using any reasonable means, and according to them, the value is Y divided by N multiplied by 10 lakh, so which is the number of employees of head office and branch office. So on the basis of head office, they are saying you can distribute the administrative cost. Then in para 3.8, they also talk about some reasonable method. So I will not go into such valuation because in order to understand this, you have to read the circular carefully. But I would certainly like to draw your attention to proviso 2 to rule 28, which says if the transaction is between two related persons of the same PAN, then whatever may be the value given in the invoice shall be accepted by the department only on one condition. And that condition is if the credit is only available to the recipient. So obviously it doesn't result into any revenue implication. अगर आपको पूरा credit मिलना है, then whatever value you want to say, you can have that value that will be accepted by the department. Let us say even if the cost of that service is 100 rupees in your books, you can charge 10 rupees, but then your output tax liability is 1. I will also claim the credit of 1. But the only condition is that recipient must be eligible to claim the credit thereof. If that credit is not available, then 100 rupees cannot be invoiced as rupees 10. This facility is available only when the recipient is entitled for the full credit. So the department knows If I'll charge him more, he will get the credit more, then there is no issue. But this concept is really important when we discuss the planning aspect or where these violations have already taken place. So it needs to be remembered very carefully. If there is an input service clearly attributable to branch office, can it be contracted by the head office and paid by the head office? How would this credit be distributed? They say if you are receiving certain service which is procurable to the branch office only, you are not consuming it, then ISD procedure has to be followed. Similarly, they say if branch office 1 employees are working for branch office 2, so then it is again a supply given by branch office 1 to branch office 2 because the revenue of that client is booked in the books of branch office 2. How it would be taxable? Then they have given this formula. Let us say 1 lakh is the salary of those employees, they are working for 200 hours. So what is the reasonable amount? Then you can calculate that value. And where such accounting is not done in the normal course of business, for example, you are not able to visualize all this, then answer is given in 3.6, which clearly says either open market value, same kind of quantity, or we can go to 30 and 31, 110%, and the benefit of second proviso to Rule 28, which we also need to remember. And looking to the time constraint, I'm just moving further bit fast. This is the conclusion which has been given in that circular. An employee of a head office registered as a separate entity does not provide any service to a branch office. Rather, it is the head office which provides service to the branch office. As I told you, in the case of personnel department technical, they say those employees are forming part of cost of the head office, and the head office is providing a service. Similarly, they say there is a need to apportion expenses incurred by one office for the provision of output service to another office by any reasonable means consistent with the principle of valuation in the EST law and generally accepted accounting principle. Such apportionment of valuation and supply shall be done on the basis of information maintained by a company in the normal course of business. There is no need to maintain additional record. And this principle shall apply to all the services which have been consumed by head office, except the only exception is where you are receiving services from the third party and not consuming yourself. You are only receiving a invoice to that, and the service has been received by the other unit. Then certainly, undoubtedly, there you have to follow the procedure of ISD. Then there is a press release by the government on 15th November which talk about the services by an employee to the employer in the course of relation to the employment, the outer scope of GST, as I told you, Schedule 3. Office of an organization in different states are recorded as distinct person. Hence, what is taxable under GST? The supply of goods and services by the head office to the branch office. Any tax charge on such supply is available to the recipient as ITC. Not any additional cost. They say that normally the credit is available. There is no additional cost. It is a worldwide practice under the GST law. GST charge on price charges by any supplier of goods and services from consumers thus comprises of all costs. Even if you don't have a head office, you procure those services from a third party, and even third party, when it will bill it to you, while billing that supply, they will also consider all costs, including the cost of the employee. So the department has made it once again clear after October by way of a press note on 15th of November. Yes, employee cost shall also form part of the cost of the head office, which shall be considered as the basis for charging to the branch offices. Consequences. If you don't follow this, the view of the government, as evident from the draft circular and press note, seems to be that GST is applicable on all common functions provided by head office to its branches. Could result into issuance of show cause notice and litigation. And the decision of the Karnataka, as I told you in the case of Columbia Hospitality, will be a very, very important decision. Now we move further and see what are the legal points which we need to discuss now. Looking at the departmental view, we have also gone through the statutory provision contained in 25.4, 25.5, Schedule 1, Schedule 3. Whether there is a supply by head office to branches for common function such as human resources, IT, taxation, etc. Whether the value of such employees shall include the employee cost, even if it is supply, then whether the employee cost need to be included, and whether the charging mechanism fails and no tax is levied, I can take a stand. If there is no supply, we have to go to the definition of supply. And in order to levy the tax, it must satisfy the charging section with the definition of supply, then only it will be taxed. Now we are going to discuss these issues one by one and the practical solution for that also. Whether services provided by the head office to branch office satisfy the test of supply. Because in case it does not satisfy the test of supply, there cannot be any levy of tax, because my charging section says, we all know, subject to the provision of subsection 2, section 9 I am reading, or section 5 we can read for IGST, both are using the same language. There shall be levied a tax not exceeding 20% on the value of supply. So supply has to be there, unless otherwise there is a supply of goods and service, my charging section does not get attracted. And once the tax is, as I told you, section 9(1) reads, subject to the provision of subsection 2, they shall be levied a tax called goods and service tax on supply of all form of supply of goods and services. It has to be supply first. There is no doubt, not even iota of doubt, and I am sure most of you will agree. Most of you, mostly, I'll say all of you will agree rather, that once it is not been covered in the definition of supply, certainly there cannot be any tax on this. Supply of goods and services between distinct persons when made in the course of furtherance of business are liable even if without consideration. That is schedule 1. But it has to be supply. Consideration may or may not be there. I am not on the question of consideration at all. I am only on the question whether it is a supply. Then let us see whether the element of supply satisfied when the service have been provided by the head office to the branch office. Can I take a stand? It does not fall in the definition supply, as there is no contractual arrangement and obligation to provide services by a supplier of service to recipient of service. There is no agreement. Branch office is not asking me, I am fulfilling such obligation because I am acting as a head office for all my branches. Services received by head office and not distributed or consumed by head office used for on self for performing its obligation as the head office. Now the question is, whatever, even if we go to the draft circular, the example taken by the department itself, the personnel department or my technical department is providing services of personnel records and technical assistance services to the branch office. Can I say these are my obligation as a head office and there is no supply being made? For that purpose, we have to go to the definition of goods and services. We all understand they have been termed, these terms have been defined in section 2 of CGST Act. Goods means all movable property except money, cash and securities. But then anything other than goods is a service. Now looking to these broad definition, can I take a plea that the head office is performing its obligation towards the branches and it does not fall in the definition of supply provided in section 7 of CGST Act? In my humble opinion, this kind of stand will be quite ambitious one, and I am of the view, maybe right or wrong, I am of the considerate view rather I should say, these will certainly fall in the definition of supply. Though one professional view is that mere incidental use by branches cannot be treated an activity of supply. Legislative intent for introducing the concept of distinct person was to ensure that credit chain is not broken. That is in the case of goods only. In any case, either if the credit is available, then there is no financial implication also. Cost incurred by head offices towards the fulfillment of the legal obligation and does not fall in the definition of supply. If I remember, there have been a couple of cases in service tax regime where, for example, EPFO case, which incidentally was argued by me only. There also we took a stand. There is no provider-recipient relationship. because I cannot negotiate. There's only one agency nominated by the government whom I have to pay the employer charges, etc. So those kind of grounds can be taken, but looking to the wide definition of goods and services and the definition of business, in my humble opinion, taking a view that it does not get covered under the definition of supply and hence it is not subject to tax is quite enterprising and risky. Then comes, if it is liable to be taxed, whether the cost of employee need to be included for the purpose of charging value from the branch offices. As I told you, and I was focusing on certain words also at that point of time, that services by an employee to the employer in the course of or relation to his employment is the language used. Employees employed for carrying out duties under the employment contract for the legal entity as a whole and not for any branch office. And these jobs are transferable also. Then there are number of case laws under the labor law, under ESCI Act, wherein they say employee is for the corporate level and not for a branch office. The activity of the head office and branch thus inextricably enmeshed. Its employees are the employees of the organization itself. There is no independent existence of the overseas branches. It is settled law that a body corporate and its branches are not distinct and separate entities. For the purpose of GST, undoubtedly you have created this fiction because in the case of goods, the credit mechanism goes off the record, and that was the whole purpose of bringing out the GST, that there is no loss of credit. So this is understandable if fiction has been created under the GST law. When it comes to income tax, even if it is a taxable supply, when I prepare my balance sheet at the corporate level, all those supplies get nullified. At the end of the day, in my final account, there is a turnover which I have earned from the third parties, and whatever is my income which I have charged from other offices, it is an expense for that office. And while consolidating, it will certainly wipe out. So if that situation is there, a deeming fiction for a specific purpose there, does it govern the labor law? Can you say an employee is an employee of that head office only and not of the corporate? As I told you, the word used is employee to employer and not employee to distinct person. If you are creating that fiction, you could have very well said services provided by the employee to a distinct person shall not form part of the supply. But in Schedule 3, you are using the term services provided by the employee to the employer, and employer certainly is a corporate. We have given Oxford dealing also, then Employees Provident Fund also defined the term employer. I'm not reading it for the sake of saving time. Then Payment of Gratuity Act also defines the term employee. So in commercial parlance, there is no doubt that employees belongs to the legal entity as a whole and not to a separate head office or to the branch office. When we issue the employment letter also, then we say so and so company has appointed you on the following terms and conditions. So whether I am employee of the distinct person, so there I feel the department doesn't have very strong grounds, and the cost of the value of service may or may not include the cost of employee. There is no doubt if the credit is available, let there be any value. Why should we buy dispute with the department? I'll come to that when we'll come to the practical solution. But then this is also important to understand. Again, a legal fiction which has been created for a specific purpose has to be used only for that limited purpose only. Whether the employee working in devs as employee of the units, then again, we have given all those reasoning, which clearly proves that the relation of employer-employee is at the corporate level, not at the branch or head office level. Employees performing services towards the corporate, not for a particular office. Employment is a contract between the employer and employee and is governed by the Contract Act as well as by any other special enactment relating such employment. By all means, the employee of an entity or employee of the entity as a whole, as the entity is a single entity. So when the employee of head office are catering to the work of all the unit, they does such work only in the capacity as an employee to the entity as a whole. So then this portion, whether for the purpose of valuation, the cost of employees should be included. I think in case we take a stand that if at all tax is to be paid on cross charge, that has to be paid on the value, excluding the cost paid to the employee, can be a reasonable stand. Then comes other common services provided by head office. So here again, when head office is paying rent or head office is paying fees to the statutory auditor, can it be said that head office is providing such services to its unit in different states? There are number of common services which are received by the head office, but all those services are being used for the purpose of controlling, providing guidance to the branch offices, supply of goods and services between distinct persons in the course of furtherance of business without consideration is subject. Now the question is whether head office is said to be procuring such common services for the benefit of all the unit, which activity by itself can be considered as a supply. If so, head office avail ITC of GST charged by all such services and in turn raise GST invoices, whether that can be done. Then there is a IST mechanism, but then IST mechanism has got a very limited scope where the supplies are being provided by the third party, not being consumed by the head office and ultimately being distributed to satisfy the test of section 16(2). If the deeming fiction of treating activities between distinct persons is applied in respect of all services received by head office, then the concept of ISD itself would be rendered redundant. So you can say that once I am receiving such services, I can raise the invoice also for that purpose. So this is one view to which I don't subscribe. According to me, there is a absolutely clear-cut difference between the scope of ISD, where the service has been provided by the third party, availed by my other branches, whereas in the case of cross-charge, those services have been consumed by head office. Yes, so far as valuation is concerned, I am of the view that services provided by the employee to the employer is being excluded, but for the purpose of valuation, that amount may kindly be included. Now, we have seen number of judgments, even Suresh Kumar Bansal, Delhi High Court, where they said if the charge mechanism fails, there is no mechanism being provided, the charge itself fails. Similarly, we have seen in the case of L&T, works contract services prior to 1st June are not subject to tax because there was no mechanism being provided. So one professional view, even this view I don't subscribe to. Let me make it very clear, I don't subscribe to this view also, but because this is a view, so I am discussing it with you. It says open market value. Open market value for the services is not available. The value of supply of the like are not possible. 100% of the cost of provisions are difficult to determine what would constitute cost. Exact allocation of a cost for time spent by employee towards a specific branch may not be possible. Then reasonable means consistent with the principle in general. This is again a very vague. So according to one view, because even if it held to be a supply in terms of section 7 read with charging section 9, even then because there is no mechanism provided for its valuation in the law, on that limited test, this levy should fail. And we have seen BC Srinivas City in income tax case, and there are so many landmark judgments on that. I am sure all the professionals must be knowing. There are so many judgments which say that the mechanism is not being provided, it should fail. Whether on this limited ground, of course, once we have to contest, we will take this ground. But personally, according to me, even this is not a very good and sound ground. This is my view. Now, what are the possible scenario? Now we have to understand what we have already done. We have understood the department view. We understood the legal implication. We have understood what are the terms, terminology, and all that. There may be a companies who have neither followed ISD nor cross-charge mechanism. Now, what they should do? So far as ISD concerned, you can say that there is no loss of revenue because in any case I have paid the tax and then I have to distribute whether A or B. It being a new law, should not be. I should not be penalized for that. There is no loss of revenue. Demand should not be made from me. Or cost. Now, in order to understand that, according to me, you have to divide your client into two parts. One where this credit is available, one the credit is not available. If the credit is available, you need not change your financial statement. Even if you treat it as a supply, you pay the tax now along with interest and let him claim the credit if the time limit permits him to do so. And because proviso 2, second proviso to rule 28 says if supply between distinct person any price value. So I can have a very nominal price, cross charge it, and then discharge my liability. And even if I'm not claiming the credit of the amount, in most of the cases the time limit may not have gone, even the credit will be available. We can follow that. Why to unnecessarily have a litigation with the department? Companies who have followed IST mechanism but not done cross charge. So there may be a situation where the companies, rather than following the IST mechanism, they have followed the cross charge in every transaction. Let us say statutory auditor bill has come. There is no doubt statutory auditor has audited other unit also. So I can raise an invoice of business support services, wherein I can include statutory auditor fees and other fees also, other expenses also, and say I am providing this support service which can be done by me. So even that formula can be worked out. Companies there may be who have only cross charge but not levied GST on employee cost. Companies who have done cross charge and levied GST on gross amount including employee cost. So all these scenarios are there. In which scenario what stand should be taken? Let us understand this. ISD registration is for third party supply. That is the legal proposition. And as I told you, because that supplier has charged tax from me, the only thing is I have not distributed to various states. It might have resulted into a situation where I am availing the credit in Delhi office, resulting into less payment of tax to Delhi, whereas this tax should have been enjoyed by Maharashtra or Tamil Nadu or Karnataka. So there that dispute can be there. So in my humble opinion, because this was the law, the department should come out with a scheme wherein they say where IST registration is not being done. So if it is not being followed in Delhi, Delhi may be a sufferer. If it is not being followed in Tamil Nadu, Tamil Nadu may be a sufferer. So one time amnesty or one time clarity should be given and then they must clarify because that's again a draft circular which has been issued by them. And one time immunity may be given. But ISD, in my humble opinion, is a concept wherein the supplies are being made by third party and they are absolutely legal. Now, if the credit is available to the recipient supply, as I told you, then we can go to second provision to rule 28 nominal value so that then whether time limit as prescribed, whether that credit is available to me or not. So looking to that and looking to the amount also, I can take a call. What should I do? How much is the tax liability? Does it attract fair and fair view? Now, this is another problem because most of the chartered accountants are signing the balance sheet and they are doing the GST audit also. If that being so, if there is a huge liability of cross charge and there is a possibility of litigation and my profits are minimal, can I say my balance sheet represents a true and fair view? And whether this amount which I have not provided in the books, does I need to qualify my balance sheet? This is another important point which I need to understand. How much is the tax liability? Does it affect the true and fair view? If credit is available, start complying immediately to avoid litigation. This is one of my suggestions. I say wrong should never be perpetuated. Today, I have become wiser. So I must start complying with the provisions as on today. And because the annual return of 17-18 has been filed, 18-19 is still under progress, I can make the liability, discharge it, and wherever possible, claim the credit also. Why I'm using the word wherever possible? Because there can be a number of practical solutions where my credit can still be saved. What is the time of supply for these services? I may enter into an arrangement. I'll raise you invoice only on half yearly basis. If that being done, then is another way of availing the credit. So there can be n number of situations. So I'm not giving a tailor-made formula to everyone. I'm saying if credit is available, start complying it immediately, so that at least there is no litigation in the past, in the future. Whatever has been done in the past, we'll see. Try to make use of second provision to rule 28, which I have repeated number of times. that even if there is no loss of credit, then litigation exposure may be much more. When they come for the litigation, it is not only cross charge, other issues will also come up. So looking to the facts of the case and looking to the fact that the credit is available, you can take benefit of Rule 28. Then according to my humble understanding, 1819, you must comply with this law. Moreover, it does not require any change in the final account. Okay, even if I raise invoices today, because it has to be different series, cross charge is the independent supply as compared to the supplies made to the third party, then at the end I need not change my balance sheet. My balance sheet remains there because ultimately these balances, these transactions need to be struck off with each other. So even signing of balance sheet will not affect at that entity level. At entity level, when credit is not available, may make payment of tax under protest to keep the issue alive. So even if you say no, I don't agree with Mr. Batra's view, and even the employee cost to be included, I want to discharge, but then I want to litigate it also. You can do that. You can pay the tax, and then if the credit is available, then there's no financial implication. But if the credit is not available, you can make the payment under protest with the right to reserve of litigation. Don't utilize that credit, and then you can litigate it also. And another question is whether 9C need to be qualified. Of course, if the amount is very huge and you feel that these are liable to be taxed, then some note, some mention must come. Can I go to advanced ruling? In my humble opinion, there is no point, because authority of advanced ruling in the case of Columbia Hospitality, it is only gone. If it is being confirmed by appellate authority, we have to look at the Karnataka High Court, what judgment comes from the Karnataka High Court. Going to advanced ruling and looking to the fact that number of advanced ruling has already been given in number of cases, my humble suggestion is it is not at all advisable to go for advanced. Whether GST Council and CBIC should be approached, yes, it can be, because a new law, there have been no clear-cut guidelines, and the department should be respected that whatever has been done in the past, it can be avoided, and some circular or some amendment can become. Ultimately, if nothing happens and I'm not in a position to comply with the law, I have no option but to litigate it. For that matter, I be mentally prepared to contest it in the high courts. With this, I would like to conclude my discussion on the subject of ISD and cross charge. Now, as I was being guided, I was being told I have to keep 15 to 20 minutes for the question answer session. So I am now stopping sharing my screen. If you want, I can again share it in case you want to look at a particular slide. Otherwise, it is open for question answer, and over to moderator.
Thank you so much, Mr. Batra. This is very informational. I'm sure all of our attendees would have found this very useful. I will now quickly go over to the question and answers which we have received. I'll take the first question, which is from Mr. Mukesh Gupta, who has asked that in case of cross-charge between head office and branch and vice versa, is it mandatory to make payment in 180 days to avail ITC? There is no bank account with some branches.
I have already answered this question while I was deliberating. So I can once again answer, because there is an exemption being provided. This proviso second to section 16(2) is not applicable when the supply are being made between two distinct persons at the same time. So there is no need to comply 180 days condition.
Now there is one more question wherein we have been asked that whether common services, audit, IT cost, corporate office rent, etc., availed by corporate offices to be charged to other unit as administrative and support services rendered by corporate office to other unit offices. If one is not capable of providing similar services to third parties, then will it be correct to say corporate office as a service provider? In itself, corporate office does not have capabilities to provide audit services.
As I told you during my deliberation also, there may be a difference of opinion. Some people may think it does not fall in the definition of supply. So then that call has to be taken by the person concerned. But my humble suggestion is, if that credit is available at the branch office, and there's no loss, then there's no point in unnecessarily litigation. Yes, litigation can be done. There is no doubt about that. And I have discussed every aspect of it, either it is employer-employee cost or whether it is supply or not. So depending on the facts, if it is the credit is not available, then my suggestion is you can litigate taking your own view, whatever view you want to take. But in my humble opinion, certainly cost charge is leviable, but only on the cost other than the employee cost.
Right. Now, there is another question we have been asked that employment is a contract between the employer and the employee and is governed by the Contract Act as well as by any other special enactments relating to such employment. The employees of any entity are employees of the whole entity. Whether it will be incorrect to limit the provisions to read it as employment for one state.
Yeah, yes, I fully agree. I said that in this, so far as this issue of employer-employee relationship is concerned, that is certainly at corporate level, number one. Number two, as I told you, for the purpose of valuation, the department doesn't have a very strong case, but then that is my personal opinion. The department has made their intention very clear while issuing that draft circular and that press note. So the department is going to litigate. In case, again, I am giving you a practical suggestion, in case the credit is available, then I must include the employee cost. Why should I unnecessarily litigate the matter? But yes, if it is not available as a credit and it is a cost to me, this is one area where I will suggest you had a good case to contest.
Now we have a
Next.
question wherein we have been asked that a company is having presence in 6 states with marketing employees sitting in each location and head office at Delhi. All office space is taken on shared basis with some other office, so no such rent expenses. Now, company is doing their sales billing from Delhi head office only for pan-India sales, including the sales made in those six states where the employees and shared office is there. All expense are being received at Delhi head office, so credit is available at Delhi head office only. It has taken GST registration for Delhi only. Company is paying proper GST on sales. Please advise the implications.
Okay. In this case, the most important question and where the litigation will come, all those 6 offices which you are having, whether they are supplying services. Nowhere in the law they say that the service has to be supplied to a third party wherein the revenue must flow into you. Once they are being treated as a distinct person and you're liable to get yourself registered and you're not registering yourself, forget about the economics of the law, financial implication of the law. That is one aspect. First of all, I need to comply with the provisions of Section 22. If I am making a supply from such state, am I not liable to seek registration? I don't know about the size of the branch office. You can say in that office, my turnover is only or my expense is only 5 lakh. But when it comes to registration, then it is the pan India turnover which need to be considered for the purpose of taxable limit. So under section 22, my only worry is by doing so, you are simply avoiding the registration cost and compliance cost, but you're buying a huge litigation. In my humble opinion, if those are the establishment which satisfy the definition of fixed establishment, which says if you had a proper resources and technical setup, then certainly they are the establishment. And I have not even iota of doubt you are supplying services from that office. If you are supplying services, your turnover is certainly more than 40 lakh. Undoubtedly, you will be liable to seek registration. So look at that point of view. In case you don't get yourself registered, department serve you a notice, then the penalty for not seeking registration. And once the credit is available only to the registered person, even the credit will not be available to you. Whatever little bit is there, you say most of the credit is available in the head office. That's a different issue. But then you have to comply with the provision of section 22, failing which you can be subject to penal action for not filing the return, for not complying with the provision of law. So even if let us say now 3 years have already been passed, so many returns have become due, even if they charge nominal additional fee or the non-registration fee, you have to refer to section 122, wherein the lot of penalties have been prescribed for not seeking registration or not filing of return. So these penalties and late fee, etc., will become a very handsome amount. So in my humble opinion, better course is to get yourself registered and comply with the law, even if even if there is no financial implication.
Okay, now jumping on to the next question, which is that with your experience in banking, kindly guide us which would be appropriate distribution, ISD or cross charge, for head office of a bank for the following services: card operations, credit card, debit card, and CVS and other technology operations. Both these operations are centralized at head office, and value addition is done by bank personnel also.
In the case of bank, there is another problem because interest does not form part of the value of taxable supplies. So you have been given two options. Either you can avail 50% credit. Of course, when it comes to cross charge, then it is a 100% credit available. That restriction of 50% does not apply to the cross charge. But in my humble opinion, because the credit is fully not available, you cannot take advantage of second proviso to Rule 28. So in my humble opinion, whatever services have been consumed in the head office, the whole cost must be distributed to your regional offices or the branches, as the case may be, for whom you are providing services. Next question.
I'll ask the next question. This says that we have multiple locations. Regional offices with supply is from one location only. No other location does any supply. As a result, we have input accumulated at other locations. Can we cross-charge this input to the location which meets supply? If yes, what would be the assessable value?
Certainly, you can do that, and the cost can be whatever is your total cost. You can charge 10% as your margin, 110% you can value it to your head office. And according to my understanding, that will satisfy the test of your auditing also, where segment reporting is to be done. So it will satisfy all the parameters. So whatever is the expense you are incurring in those marketing offices, you add 10% margin, then there is no dispute whatsoever under the GST law, and that credit is certainly available to the office from where you are doing a billing. There's a lot of credit scope available to you. Then by doing so, you are avoiding the litigation, also complying with the provisions of law, and then there's no dispute with regard to valuation also when you're charging 110% of the total cost.
I will now take the last. So there is one which asks that ABC manufacturer is registered in Delhi, receiving orders and having a warehouse in Haryana for supplying of goods. Is there a requirement to get warehouse registered and apply cross-charge?
Obviously, if we are transferring goods to your warehouse from where the goods are moving to other parts of the state, the whole sale will be made in that particular state. There will be a huge output tax liability unless otherwise you don't bill it to the warehouse and then warehouse bill it to the other parties. The whole credit mechanism will be lost. I'm not able to understand this question because if you are doing that, it is not practically possible to run the business without charging to the warehouse. I think you need to repeat the question because this cannot be the case in real life.
Right. Let's hope that he actually puts up the question again. Now, jumping into the question, which is that how do we apply Rule 37 to ISD transaction? ITC to be reversed on non-payment taxes will be in hand of recipients.
I'm not able to listen to this question carefully. What are you saying? Rule?
I will repeat myself. Then how do we apply Rule 37 to ISD transaction? ITC to be reversed on non-payment taxes will be in hand of recipients.
As I told you, in the case of cross charge, it can be done only with reference to the distinct person where there is no requirement of payment of 180 days. There is no need of any reversal, according to my understanding. I'm just looking at the book, what you are talking about, Rule 46. So far as my information and knowledge goes, there is nothing, time limit for issuing the tax invoice. If you're talking about the time limit, then Section 12 and 13, so far as supply is concerned, Section 13 is very clear. You have to raise the invoice at least, if not on a monthly basis, on quarterly basis positively. To be very frank, I am not able to understand the question. So therefore, the answer is also not hitting on the nail.
No problem. So we'll see that if the person who asked the question will maybe ask the question again. But we're running short on time now. We have just 2 minutes. So I'll take a last question now, which is that whether certain services such as rent, travel, and telephone can be allocated by ISD to different units.
As I told you, they cannot be allocated by the unit as a IST. For that, you have to do the cross charge, because rent, the things are being consumed by the head office level, and that is the understanding of the department also, and that is my understanding also. So far as this part is concerned, I am in agreement with the department. Those services being consumed, you have to cross charge, and ISD is not the proper mechanism.
Thank you so much, Mr. Batra. With this, we'd like to call this a close to the webinar. We have had a very informational session. I would like to thank you for being with us, and I would like to thank all of our attendees as well. We will end the webinar here, and I hope that everybody stays well. Thank you so much.